Many people believe dill is one of the easiest plants to grow, but then they wonder why it comes up thin, turns yellow too early, or disappears after just a few weeks, and I have seen that mistake more times than I can count. The biggest problem is not the seeds, and it is not the weather, because in most cases the mistake happens before the first seed even touches the soil. I used to think the same way many years ago, and every spring I blamed poor seeds or bad luck until one old gardener smiled at me and quietly showed me what I had been doing wrong all along. Since then, I have never looked at dill the same way, and every season it reminds me that simple habits often bring the biggest harvest. I want to share these old methods because they do not cost money and they do not require expensive products or special equipment. Most people rush to prepare the bed and scatter the seeds wherever there is free space, but dill notices every small detail, even when we do not. I always begin by looking at the ground after a good rain, because the soil tells me much more than any calendar. If the water stays on the surface for too long, I already know the roots will struggle later, even if the seedlings look healthy at first. Many gardeners never pay attention to that, and months later they wonder why their plants become weak for no clear reason. Another mistake that almost everyone makes is watering the ground heavily right after sowing because it feels like the right thing to do, but sometimes that single action pushes the tiny seeds deeper than they should be, and they lose the strength to reach the surface. I learned to be patient instead of trying to help nature too much, and that small change surprised me with stronger and more even sprouts than I had ever seen before. There is one more little trick that an elderly neighbor showed me decades ago, and almost nobody talks about it today because it sounds too simple to matter, but every spring I still use it before planting my first row of dill, and the difference becomes clear within days. Would you like to know why that forgotten step changes almost everything? I remember the first time I ignored that old advice because I thought there had to be a faster way, and I paid for that mistake with almost an empty bed while my neighbor picked fresh dill every few days without any effort. That was the moment I understood that planting is only the beginning, and what happens during the first week decides almost everything that comes later. Most people think watering means giving the plants as much water as possible, but dill does not reward generosity if it comes at the wrong time. I never pour a large amount of water on freshly planted seeds because the surface becomes hard after drying, and young shoots have to fight through that crust before they even see the sun. Instead, I keep the soil gently moist, and I check it with my fingers rather than trusting my eyes because the top can look dry while the soil underneath still holds enough moisture. Very few people do this simple check, and that is why they often water too much without realizing it. An old gardener showed me another habit many years ago, and I still smile every time I use it because it costs nothing and takes less than a minute. Before watering, I lightly loosen only the very top layer of soil beside the row without touching where the seeds are resting. That tiny movement helps the ground breathe and allows water to spread more evenly instead of running away across the surface. After I started doing that, I noticed the young dill appeared more evenly and stayed greener much longer. Many gardeners believe fertilizer should come first, but I always tell people that healthy roots are worth far more than extra feeding in the beginning. If the roots grow calmly, they will find what they need on their own. Another mistake I see every season is planting dill where it grew last year because it seems convenient, but I always move it to another spot whenever I can. My grandfather used to say that even simple plants appreciate a fresh place, and over the years I found there was more truth in those words than I expected. There's still one forgotten watering habit that I never skip once the seedlings reach a few inches tall, and it completely changes how thick and fragrant the dill becomes before harvest. That small step surprised even experienced gardeners when they first saw the result, and I will explain exactly how I do it next. There is one watering habit that many people overlook because it does not seem important at first, but over the years I have learned that it often decides whether dill grows soft and weak or thick and full of aroma. Most gardeners water whenever they have a little free time, and I understand why, because life gets busy and we all try to fit garden work into our day. I used to do exactly the same thing until an older man from our village stopped me one summer morning and asked why I was making the plants work harder than necessary. At first, I did not understand what he meant, but then he explained that watering is not only about giving moisture, but also about helping the roots stay calm instead of constantly adjusting to changing conditions. Since then, I almost always water either early in the morning before the sun becomes strong, or later in the evening when the soil has already cooled down. The difference was much bigger than I expected, because the ground stayed moist longer and I needed less water to get the same result. That means I saved both time and effort while the dill stayed fresh even during warm weeks. Another little secret that almost nobody talks about is watering slowly instead of pouring everything at once. When water comes too quickly, much of it simply runs away from the roots and disappears where the plants cannot use it. I let the water soak in gently and then I wait a moment before adding a little more. It may seem slower, but in the end I actually spend less time because I do not have to water as often. Many people also make the mistake of wetting the leaves every day. A light splash once in a while is not a problem, but I always try to direct most of the water toward the soil, because that is where the plant truly needs it. My grandfather used to say that strong roots grow strong leaves, and after many seasons I have no reason to argue with that wisdom. There is another forgotten method that costs absolutely nothing, and it helps the soil hold moisture much longer, even when the weather becomes dry. The first time I tried it, I was surprised by how simple it was, and even more surprised by how much healthier my dill looked just a few days later. That old trick is probably the easiest secret of all, and I would never skip it now that I have seen what it can do. One of the oldest methods I still use today is so simple that many people smile when they first hear about it, but after trying it once they rarely stop using it. Never leave the soil completely bare around young dill because bare ground loses moisture much faster than most people realize. Years ago, an elderly neighbor showed me how he covered the surface with a very thin layer of dry grass or a little loose straw after the seedlings became strong enough. He told me not to make the layer thick because dill still needs air and light around the stems, but just enough to protect the soil from drying too quickly. I followed his advice, and after only one season I noticed that I was carrying the watering can much less often. The ground stayed cool longer and the plants looked fresh even after several warm afternoons. Many gardeners think this method is only useful during very hot weather, but I have seen it work during ordinary summers as well, because it helps keep the moisture more even instead of letting the soil swing from very wet to completely dry. Most people never notice those constant changes, but the roots certainly do. Another mistake I often see is harvesting too late, because people wait until the plants become as tall as possible. I used to think bigger always meant better, but fresh young dill has a stronger smell and a softer texture that many people forget about. I usually begin cutting a little at a time instead of taking everything at once, and that encourages new growth while giving me fresh greens over a much longer period. It feels good to walk into the garden every few days and always find something ready without having to plant again immediately. There is another forgotten habit that my father practiced every spring and I did not fully appreciate until much later. He always kept a small packet of dill seeds nearby, and every couple of weeks he sowed just a short new row instead of planting everything on the same day. At first I wondered why he bothered with such a simple routine, but by the middle of summer his garden still had fresh young dill while many other gardens already had tall flowering plants. That single habit changed the way I plan my own planting every year, and there is still one final old secret that brings all these methods together in a way that surprises almost everyone who tries it for the first time. The final secret is probably the one that surprised me the most because for many years I believed that good dill depended mostly on the seeds. I spent money on different varieties and always hoped the next packet would solve my problems, but the truth turned out to be much simpler. Healthy dill comes from regular care and small habits repeated every season instead of one special product. My father used to tell me that the garden rewards patience more than strength, and now I understand exactly what he meant. One thing I never do anymore is pull out every flowering plant the moment I see it. I leave one or two of the strongest plants standing until the end of the season, because they remind me which ones grew best in my garden, and they often provide seeds for the following year. Those seeds already know the local weather and the local soil, and I have noticed they often germinate very well without any extra effort. Many people throw away that opportunity without even thinking about it. There is another little habit that I follow every time I harvest dill. I never remove too much from one plant at once because it needs enough green leaves to continue growing. If I cut only what I need for today's meal, the plant quickly recovers and keeps producing fresh shoots for a much longer time. It feels good to walk into the garden whenever I need fresh herbs instead of cutting everything in one afternoon and watching the bed become empty. Very few people talk about this because it sounds almost too obvious, but simple habits often make the biggest difference over an entire season. Another forgotten method that an elderly gardener shared with me many years ago was to spend just a few quiet minutes looking at the plants instead of rushing through the work. When you slow down, you notice small changes in the leaves, the color of the soil, and the moisture around the roots before any real problem appears. That simple observation has saved many of my plants without spending a single coin on expensive treatments. There is still one final lesson that ties together every secret I have shared today, and in my experience it is the reason why some gardens continue producing fresh, fragrant dill year after year, while others struggle even when they receive much more attention. I always keep this last lesson in mind because it changed the way I look at every season in the garden, and I think it may change the way you look at yours as well. There is one lesson that took me many years to understand, and once I accepted it, my garden became easier to manage and much more enjoyable. I stopped trying to force quick results and began paying attention to what the plants were quietly showing me every single day. Dill is one of those plants that speaks through small signs, if we are willing to notice them. When the leaves stay bright and stand upright, I know the roots are comfortable. When the color begins to fade or the stems lose their strength, I do not rush for fertilizer anymore because the problem is often much simpler than that. I first check the soil with my hand and I look at how quickly it dries after watering. Many people skip that step and immediately think they need to buy something from the garden store. Over the years, I have saved a lot of money simply by understanding what the plant really needed instead of guessing. Another old habit I still follow is keeping a small notebook where I write the planting date, the first watering after sowing, and the weather during the first couple of weeks. It may sound old-fashioned, but after several seasons, those notes become more valuable than any advertisement or colorful package of seeds. I can look back and remember exactly what worked during a dry spring or after a rainy week. Very few gardeners keep such simple records, but they help avoid repeating the same mistakes year after year. One more forgotten method that I learned from an experienced gardener is never finishing all the work in one visit to the garden. I spend a little time there almost every day, even if it is only 10 minutes. During those quiet visits, I notice weeds before they spread, I see dry spots before the plants begin to suffer, and I enjoy the garden instead of treating it like hard work. That simple routine has given me healthier dill and much less stress throughout the season. When friends ask why my dill always seems fresh and full, I tell them there is no magic, and there is no expensive secret. It is simply a collection of small habits repeated with patience and care. Still, there is one final thought that I always like to leave with anyone who grows even a single row of dill, because once you understand it, you begin looking at your entire garden in a completely different way. And that is exactly what I want to share with you in the final part. When I look back at all the years I have spent in the garden, I realize that the biggest harvest did not come from expensive tools or rare seed packets. It came from learning to slow down and trust simple methods that had already helped gardeners for generations. Proper planting, careful watering, and a little patience can completely change the way dill grows without making your work harder. I still remember how disappointed I felt when my first beds produced thin, weak plants that quickly flowered before I could enjoy them. Today, I know those failures taught me more than easy success ever could. Every season, I prepare the soil with care, I avoid planting too deeply, I water gently instead of heavily, and I never forget those small forgotten habits that older gardeners passed on to me many years ago. None of these methods cost much, and most of them cost nothing at all, but together they create a result that surprises many people who visit my garden for the first time. Fresh, fragrant dill stays on the table much longer, and I spend less time fixing problems because many of them never appear in the first place. If you have struggled with dill before, I hope you will not give up because even one small change can make the next season completely different. Try one or two of these old methods first and watch how the plants respond before changing everything at once. The garden always rewards patience and careful observation much more than rushing from one new product to another. I still learn something every year, and that is one of the reasons I enjoy gardening as much today as I did decades ago. If these simple secrets help you grow healthier dill, then I will be very happy because old knowledge only stays alive when we share it with others. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope the next time you walk into your garden, you will notice something new that you may have missed before. There are many more forgotten methods that deserve to be remembered, and in the next conversation, I would be glad to share another old gardening secret that has served me well for many years.